Hello and welcome to another Plain Truth, and this week we're going to be talking about aircraft turning circles. Joining me, as always, is the legend that is Captain Al. Hi, Captain Al.
Hello, Matt.
Right, so my coach has got my car's fine, I have to be honest. The C-Max is awesome, the turning circle is great. In the coach, not so much, it has to be said. And that actually got me thinking, because obviously aircraft sort of strike me as not the most agile things when they're on the ground. I mean, what's the turning circle like on something like the A320?
Okay, it's a really good question. And actually, to be perfectly honest, aeroplanes aren't too bad. We've gone a long way from the days of when aircraft were like a shopping trolley on the ground.
Right, okay.
So, for example, when I used to fly the Jetstream 41, for younger viewers, that was a 29-seat turboprop designed and built by the British. If you turned the steering tiller, because remember the yoke doesn't do anything on the ground for turning, if you turned the steering tiller too far, the nose wheel would come off the steering rack.
Oh.
So,
wow.
so then you had lost control of the nose wheel, so you had to try to catch it back up by using brakes or asymmetric thrust to try to get it back on the steering rack. Okay, so we've progressed somewhat from there. The A320 family is really quite good. The steering is all steer by wire, so we fly by wire and we steer by wire. So it's all quite electronic, and it does take a little bit of getting used to. However, we have quite a lot of maneuverability because that nose wheel can turn by quite a long way. So let me give you an example. On the A320, not the family, but the A320, if you were to put the nose of the aeroplane, well, just for simple terms, 1 foot away from the hangar doors. So you've taxied the aeroplane up to the hangar, you've stopped to 1 foot short, and you think, oh no, it's the wrong hangar. We should be on the one over there. We need to turn around. So you can't find anybody to open the hangar doors to get a tug in to push you back. On the A320, the geometry or the turning circle is such that you can turn the aeroplane around in its own length and not hit the wingtip on the hangar.
Wow. Okay.
So if you think about it, it can just turn around in its own length and you won't hit the wing as you turn around. So that's pretty impressive. Don't try it on a 321, it won't work. You will put the wingtip through the hangar and you won't be popular. Now, let's look at this in a practical sense. So we're going to go to an airport, and the runway is a standard runway width, which is 45 meters wide. And when they built the airport, they put the taxiway from the runway to the terminal in the middle. Now, we are not able to stop by that point, not without squashing everybody's nose into the seat back in front of them. So we have to go past that exit. And the runway doesn't have turning circle, so we have to turn around in 45 meters. The A320 and the 321 can do that. 320 with ease, the 321 requires a little bit of technique, and where you position the aircraft is quite important. There are a set of instructions for it in the manual. You have to give some consideration to the fact of the runway surface, because as we've talked about previously, aeroplanes handle differently on wet runways, snow-covered runways. They'll skid more. So as you put more steering input into the nose wheel, the aeroplane still wants to go forward, so it will just skid to the nose wheel. And occasionally, if you're sat at the front of an aircraft, you'll hear the nose wheel skidding as they turn, because they may be just going a little bit fast. Right. Or the nose wheel is on the white or yellow line. As we know, those painted lines, especially if you're a motorbiker, are skiddy as heck. So the nose wheel will skid. So that's all fine and dandy. We can turn the aeroplane around. Now, if we're going in a bigger aeroplane, we can't turn around on a 45-meter wide runway. So I'll give you an example. The A330, depending on which variant you bought, may or may not be able to turn on a 45-meter runway. The ones that Monarch had weren't able, well, at least not by the books anyway. So you better have a turning circle down the end. They're called dumbbells, if you like. They're just an extended bit of the runway, 2 blobs put on the end, gives you a bit more room to work with. Again, it can be a little bit tight. And this is a consideration if you're operating large aircraft, because it may well be that the runway is long enough and wide enough for you to land on, but you have to consider whether you can turn around on it. Because if it's a long runway and say it's, 800 meters or 1,000 meters from one end to the terminal, no one is going to particularly enjoy getting off the aeroplane, walking a kilometre to the terminal because you couldn't turn the aeroplane around and there wasn't anybody with a tug to be able to do that. So it is a big consideration. Equally, when we taxi the aeroplane around, we have to think about where the wingtips are and the wheels, because if you're operating a large aircraft, the taxiways need to be wide enough for you as well, and also strong enough to support the aircraft. So there are lots of taxiways that you can't operate wide-bodied aircraft in because you will hit the lights with the wingtips.
Right.
So there is a famous story from days of Monarch where a captain fastidiously followed the taxiway markings in a 330 and promptly removed part of the wingtip because he hit a palm tree. Because the taxiway markings were not designed for a 330, they were designed for a Tupolev.
Right.
So yeah, there is a lot to be considered, but ultimately aeroplanes are quite maneuverable. The one thing that the majority of them can't do is reverse. So you have to think about your exit strategy, especially if you're going to somewhere where you're not sure if there is a tug and a tow bar that will fit your aircraft.
Right. So with that in mind then, I mean, how much of an impact would, for example, an icy runway have on your ability to leave the runway and go to your gate, for example? I mean, does that have an impact on the manoeuvrability of the aircraft?
Absolutely, it has a huge factor. It's exactly the same as as your car, if you like. If you're trying to park your car in a car park and it's icy, your car's going to be less maneuverable because the wheels are just slipping everywhere. And one of the problems that we have operating to wintry airports, it's an environmental issue actually. Taxiways and runways are quite often sort of well removed of contaminants, so de-iced, anti-ice, etc., and they will put fluid down on those. Once you get onto the parking apron, it's quite often quite treacherous there because for environmental reasons there, and cost of course, because this stuff is expensive but not very good for the environment, so they're not so well prepared. And many years ago when I was on an Embraer 145, I was parking the aircraft in Oslo Gardermoen, and as we were turning onto the parking stand, I went to brake to slow the aircraft down, and the aeroplane just started to skid. And it's just going forwards with, the wheels are locked. It's just merrily slipping forward. And in the end, we actually had to shut the engines down because that was the only way we were going to stop was to turn off the thrust and just come to a gentle halt. And we did about a foot away from a snowbank, which was quite fortunate because it kept the paperwork to a minimum.
Right, yes.
But yes, it can be very slippy. And of course, your ability to make tight turns is seriously degraded when the runway or the taxiway is wet because the wheels will just slip.
Right.
And as I mentioned to you, the nose wheel has a tendency to skid anyway, especially if there's not a lot of weight at the front because it's just sat, with a light contact to the ground. It doesn't take much to push it forwards regardless of which way the wheels are pointing.
Quite.
Because, of course, the engines don't swivel.
No, indeed. Well, as always, Al, a very complicated subject that is made very simple. As always, many thanks, Al.
It's my pleasure.
If you'd like to watch more from our great series, then you can do that by pressing here. We've also created you a playlist with all the Plain Truth episodes, and you'll find that just here. Why not like and subscribe to our channel? That way you will be notified whenever we post our great content. Or if you've got a question that you'd like Captain Al to answer, then why not pop it in the comments box below, and you may well feature on an upcoming episode of The Plain Truth.